The big house, known as Willowbrook to everyone in the village, was never a home to her. It was a monument to the family who owned it, and to the son they had lost. For her, it was just a very beautiful, very cold cage. They were polite to her in front of the vicar or the ladies from the charity committee. "Our dear daughter," her mother-in-law would say, a cold hand resting on her shoulder like a weight. But when the guests left, the warmth left with them. The chill of the old stone walls seeped into her bones. They gave her the east wing room, pretty with its tall window, but it faced away from the sun. The fireplace smoked, and they never quite got around to having it fixed for her. Her days were a quiet pattern of small duties and smaller meals. She would take tea with the family, sitting silently while they talked over her, about her, as if she were a piece of furniture that had come with the house. Her brother-in-law, a man with a laugh that sounded like ice cracking, would make comments. "You're not eating, sister? No wonder you feel the cold. A bit more spirit. That's what you need." His wife would nod, her eyes sharp and satisfied. The truth was, she felt the cold because she was always afraid. The secret she carried was a block of ice in her chest. Her husband, the family's golden boy, had not died peacefully in his sleep from a weak heart, as the doctor and the death certificate said. She had found him in his study, a single terrible moment that replayed behind her eyes every night. He had left a note, just a few scribbled lines of despair she could barely understand. In her first wild grief, she had burned it. She told the family he was gone, her voice barely a whisper, and let them assume the rest. Why did she lie? To protect him. To protect the perfect memory his parents needed. And in a small, selfish corner of her heart, to protect herself. She knew what they would say. They would say she drove him to it, that she was a failure, not just as a wife who gave them no grandchildren, but as the person who should have saved him. The shame would have been hers to carry forever. So she swallowed the truth and let it freeze inside her. Her punishment for this secret, though she never spoke of it, was the life they gave her. It was the way her mother-in-law's eyes narrowed when she looked at her, as if sensing a hidden flaw. It was the allowance that barely covered thread to mend her old clothes. It was the comment about how the draft in her room was good for the Constitution. Most of all, it was the slow, steady pressure that had started a few months ago. Dot papers would appear beside her breakfast plate. Legal papers. Her brother-in-law would explain in his smooth lawyer's voice. It was about simplifying things, protecting the estate. Her husband, he said, had left a few small investments in her name. Just a formality to sign them over to the family trust for management. "You don't want to bother your pretty head with stocks and bonds, do you?" he would say, sliding a pen toward her. She would shake her head mute and push the papers back, her hand trembling. The refusal made the air in the house grow colder. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. A maid, one of the few who was kind, was let go. "We must be careful with expenses," her mother-in-law declared at dinner, staring right at her. The portions on her plate grew smaller. One evening, she came down to find the fire in the main drawing room unlit, a stack of her late husband's books missing from the shelf. "We're storing some things," was all the explanation she got. She spent her afternoons walking. It was the only time she felt she could breathe. She would follow the lane away from the house, past the tidy gardens, and into the wilder woods that bordered the property. The trees didn't judge her. The frozen creek didn't demand anything from her. She would walk until her fingers were numb inside her thin gloves, until the physical cold outside almost matched the one within. One such afternoon, the sky was a flat, iron gray. She was turning to go back, dreading the return to the silent, watching house, when she heard a sound. Not a bird or the wind, but a low, grinding roar. It came from the bend in the lane where it met the main road. She hesitated. Curiosity, a feeling long buried, nudged her forward. Around the bend, a pickup truck was tilted at an ugly angle, its back wheels deep in the muddy, half-frozen ditch. A man was standing by it, one hand on the hood, his head bowed. He wasn't dressed like anyone from the village. His jacket was practical, worn at the elbows, and his boots were caked with dry mud. He looked up as she approached, and she saw his face was not angry, but frustrated. He had kind eyes, lined at the corners from squinting, she thought. He saw her and straightened up. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was calm. "Not my finest parking job, I'm afraid." She stopped a few feet away, unsure what to do. "The ditch. It gets very deep there after the rain," she said softly, almost surprised to hear her own voice. "I'm learning that the hard way," he said, offering a small, wry smile. He wasn't handsome in a polished way, but his face was open. "I was trying to get a better look at the rock face back there. For my work. You're a driver?" she asked, looking at the truck. His smile widened a little. "Geologist. I look at rocks. This whole area has a fascinating history under our feet." She knew about the family's history, the portraits on the walls. No one had ever spoken of history under their feet. She glanced at the truck's stuck wheels, then at the woods. Without a word, she walked to a pile of old lumber left by the estate workers. She picked up a short, thick plank, carried it back, and laid it in the mud next to his back tire. He watched her, his surprise clear. Then he nodded, understanding. Traction, smart. He didn't say, "for a woman," or sound surprised. She had a thought in her head. He just got into the driver's seat. "When I signal, can you give it a little push from that side?" He called out. She placed her hands on the cold metal of the truck bed. He started the engine, gentle at first. The wheels spun, caught on the wood, and with a sickening suck, the truck lurched backward onto solid ground. She stumbled back, her boots splattered with mud. He got out, relief on his face. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. "That was clever of you. I'd have been here until dark." He looked at her properly then, noting her good but outdated coat, her thin gloves. "Are you from the big house?" She nodded, suddenly shy. I should go." "Of course," he said. He paused, as if wanting to say more, then simply said, "Thank you again." "I'm Leo." The name was simple, solid. She didn't offer her own. She just nodded again, turned, and began the walk back to Willowbrook. But as she walked, she wasn't thinking about the cold room waiting for her. She was thinking about the sound of her own voice giving advice, and the feeling of the truck moving under her hands. It was a tiny thing, but for the first time in a very long time, she hadn't felt entirely invisible. The memory of the man by the truck, Leo, became a small secret warmth she carried inside. In the cold dining room, while her brother-in-law droned on about estate taxes, she would remember the simple "thank you" he had said. It was the way he'd said it, not as a polite, empty phrase, but as if she had truly helped him. No one in the house had looked at her like that in years. A few days later, the pressure got worse. The papers were back on the table, this time with a sleek new pen lying across them. "We really must settle this, my dear," her mother-in-law said, her voice like silk over steel. "It's becoming an administrative nuisance." The word nuisance hung in the air. She felt like the word herself. A nuisance in their perfect, grieving home. That afternoon, her walk was not for air, but for escape. She almost ran down the lane, her breath coming in sharp clouds. She stood by the ditch where his truck had been, staring at the tire marks now frozen in the mud. She felt foolish. He was a stranger, a passing moment. Yet that moment had felt more real than a whole year in that house. The following morning, a surprise broke the grim routine. The housekeeper told her someone was at the back door asking for her. Not the front door for guests, but the back door for tradesmen and deliveries. Puzzled, she went to the kitchen. There he was, Leo. He stood on the step, the cold air rushing in around him. In his hands was a simple wooden basket filled with oranges. They were a shocking, vibrant orange color, like captured sunlight. "Hello," he said, seeming a little awkward but earnest. "I was in the next town over, and they had these. From the south. I thought, well, a proper thank you for the rescue." He held out the basket. She was so startled she just stared. No one brought her gifts. The family's gifts were always obligations. A scarf at Christmas she never chose. Books they thought she should read. The cook and a maid were pretending not to watch, but she could feel their eyes. You didn't have to," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said simply. He glanced past her into the warm, bustling kitchen, then back at her tense face. "It's no trouble. They're good oranges." She took the basket. The fruits were cool and smooth in her hands, their sweet, sharp smell cutting through the kitchen smell of old grease and bleach. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. He nodded, about to leave, then seemed to remember something. "Oh, the reason I bothered you. I'm doing some work for the county, mapping the old rock layers. I was hoping to look at some of the older property records for this area. Land deeds, that sort of thing. Would you know who I might ask about that?" The family was away for the day in the city, seeing their lawyer. The silence of the house was her own for a few precious hours. A reckless, unfamiliar feeling rose in her chest. "The records," she said slowly. "I think some old boxes are in the library. My husband's father liked to keep things. I could show you." She saw the surprise on his face, and then a careful acceptance. "That would be a great help, but only if it's no bother." It was a bother. It was the most dangerous, bothersome thing she could imagine. But the thought of him walking away, of returning to the silent, empty rooms, was worse. "Come in," she said, stepping back. She led him not through the grand main hall, but through the side corridors to the library. It was a dusty, rarely used room. Sun streamed through a high window, lighting up the motes of dust in the air. She pointed to a heavy oak chest in the corner. "I believe they are in there. I've never really looked." He didn't rush to the chest. He stood in the middle of the room, looking at the shelves. "This is a good room," he said. "Quiet." He walked over to a large, faded map framed on the wall. It showed the estate as it was 100 years ago. "See here," he said, his finger tracing a line. "This ridge behind your house. That's not just a hill. That was the shoreline of an ancient sea millions of years ago. All the stone here is full of fossils. Little stories of old lives." She listened, mesmerized. No one had ever shown her how to see stories in the stones. Her life was all about the past, but it was a past of portraits and silverware and shame. This was a past of unimaginable time, of seas that came and went. It made her own troubles feel both tiny and strangely connected to something vast. He spent an hour going through the old deeds, making neat notes in a small book. She sat in a warm armchair, not speaking, just watching him work. He was focused, but not intense. He hummed a little under his breath. Once, he found a pressed flower in one of the books and showed it to her, its color brown and fragile. "A forgotten bookmark," he said with a smile. When he finished, he carefully put everything back exactly as he found it. "Thank you," he said. "You've saved me weeks of chasing clerks and offices." She walked him back to the kitchen door. The oranges still sat on the table, glowing. As he was about to leave, he turned. "It's a big house," he said gently. "Must get lonely." The simple truth of it, spoken so kindly, almost undid her. Her eyes filled with tears, which she blinked back fiercely. She just nodded, unable to speak. He didn't comment on her tears. He just said, "The oranges are best at room temperature. Let them sit a day." And then he was gone, the door closing on the cold world outside. That night at dinner, the family was back. Her brother-in-law was in a foul mood. "What's this I hear about some man at the house?" He snapped at the housekeeper. "A geologist, sir? Asking after the old land records?" The mistress showed him the library. All eyes turned to her. The air froze. "You did what?" Her brother-in-law hissed. "You let some tramp, some laborer, into our private library? Are you simple?" She shrank into her chair. He was from the county. He was polite. He scoffed. They're all polite until they case the place. This is exactly why you cannot be trusted with decisions. Your judgment is clearly impaired by your condition. The forbidden truth inside her felt like it was screaming. She looked down at her plate. Later, alone in her cold room, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She peeled one of the oranges. The scent burst into the room, bright and alive. She ate a segment. The juice was sweet and tart on her tongue. It was the taste of kindness, a small act with no strings attached. And as she sat in the dark, the sweet taste in her mouth, she felt the first tiny crack in the wall of ice around her heart. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain, silence, and strange, careful routine. The man was a ghost in the shack. He moved through the small space without sound, his presence announced only by the soft scuff of his boots on the dirt floor, or the click of the tin cup being placed beside her. He never spoke. Not a word. He would bring her water, a simple broth made from dried meat, a piece of hard biscuit. He would check her bandages with those same clinical, unhurried hands, his face giving away nothing. When he was done, he would simply go back outside Dot at first. Ellie was too weak and too afraid to break the silence. The memory of Stag's empty eyes was too fresh. This man, with his quiet intensity, was another unknown danger. She watched him, studying every move. She saw the way he always positioned himself, so his back was never fully to the door. She saw how his eyes, those pale, watchful eyes, constantly scanned the canyon opening, even while he stirred the broth over the small fire. But as the fever broke, and the sharpest edge of the pain dulled to a heavy, constant ache, her fear began to curdle into frustration. The silence in the canyon was immense, a physical weight pressing down on her. It was worse than the desert heat. At least the desert had the wind. Here, there was only the quiet sounds of a man who refused to be a person. On the third morning, he changed her bandage. The wound was angry and red, but it was clean, closing slowly. He gave a slight nod of satisfaction, his highest form of praise, and turned to leave. "Wait." The word croaked out of her, rough and unused. It sounded too loud in the quiet shack. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. "Who are you?" she asked, pushing herself up on one elbow. A bolt of pain shot through her side, but she ignored it. "Why did you bring me here?" He stood perfectly still for a moment, then slowly turned. He looked at her, his expression as blank as the canyon wall. He didn't answer. Anger, hot and sudden, pushed past her fear. "You have to talk to me. They tried to kill me. Those men from the mine. They'll be looking. Do you work for them? Is this some kind of trap?" Her voice was rising, shaky with weakness and emotion. "Just say something." For a long minute, he just looked at her. Then, he did something unexpected. He walked to the small crate he used for supplies. He rummaged inside and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. He came back and knelt by her cot, the dust from the floor puffing up softly. He opened the pouch and emptied its contents onto the blanket beside her leg. Her breath caught. There were three things. First, a single crumpled piece of paper, its edges charred black. It was a scrap from her notebook. On it, she could just make out her own hurried writing. Asterisk. Sangre de plata, stag. Wages withheld. Asterisk second. A spent bullet casing, dull brass in the dim light. Third, a small square of cloth. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a tarnished metal star, a U.S. Marshal's badge. It was scratched and bent, as if it had been struck by something heavy. Ellie stared, her mind racing. He had gone back. After finding her, he had gone back to the place she was shot and sifted through the ashes and the sand. He had found proof. He pointed a calloused finger first at the scrap of paper, then at the bullet casing. His meaning was clear. This is what happened to you. Then he reached up with his other hand. Slowly, he pulled aside the collar of his faded shirt. There, on the side of his neck, just below his jaw, was an old, ugly scar. It wasn't a random wound. It was a brand. The skin was raised in a crude, recognizable shape, a capital S and P fused together. Sangre de plata, the mind's mark. A mark of ownership burned into a man. He let the collar fall back. Then he pointed from the brand on his neck to the ruined badge on the cloth, and finally his pale eyes locked on hers. The story was told without a single syllable. He was no hired hand. He was no wandering thief. He was a man who had once worn a star and had the mark of that mine put on him like an animal. The mine had taken something from him, too. Something that left a deeper wound than the one on her side. The anger drained out of Ellie, leaving her feeling hollow and understood in a way words could never have achieved. Her questions, her demands for speech, now seemed foolish. The desert had its own language, and this man spoke it fluently. They heard you, she whispered, her voice soft now. He gave one slow, deep nod. The first real communication that was more than just necessity. And Stag? She asked. The foreman? A different look passed over his face then. It wasn't anger. It was colder, harder. It was the look of a man who has carried a heavy stone for a very long time. He nodded again, just once. He gathered the items, the scrap of paper, the casing, the badge, and placed them back in the pouch. He held it for a moment, then, to her surprise, he placed it on the crate next to her cot. It was no longer just his story. He was sharing it. He stood up and walked to the door. This time, before he stepped out into the sunlight, he paused. He looked back at her, and for the briefest second, she saw something else in his eyes. Not friendship, not warmth, but a grim recognition. They were on the same side of a terrible line now. He turned to the left, leaving her with the echo of his silence, which no longer felt empty. It was full of a shared past, a shared enemy, and a silent promise that her fight was no longer hers alone. She picked up the water cup, her hand steadier than it had been in days. She took a drink, looking at the pouch on the crate. She wasn't just a wounded woman in a shack anymore. She was part of a story, and for the first time since the gunshot, she felt the faint, stirring ember of a plan. The acorn was a secret in her pocket. For 2 days, she would reach in and feel its hard, smooth surface, a tiny talisman of the truth she had shared. It made the atmosphere at Willowbrook feel different. Their coldness was no longer a punishment she simply accepted. It was a confirmation of their cruelty. She watched them with new eyes, no longer just a victim, but someone with a hidden piece of knowledge. She had told her story, and it had been met with kindness, not judgment. That changed her, but the family, sensing a shift in her they couldn't name, tightened their grip. Her brother-in-law cornered her in the hall, outside the library. He didn't shout. His voice was low, venomous. "I've made inquiries about your geologist friend," he said, his eyes cold. "An itinerant laborer, moving from town to town. No family to speak of. A lonely man who preys on lonely, vulnerable women with property." She felt a flare of anger so sharp it startled her. "He is not like that." "Oh? And you're an expert on men now?" He sneered. "You, who couldn't even keep your own husband from despair." The words were a calculated blow, meant to wound. He had no idea how close to the truth he was striking, but the malice was the same. "He is using you. He wants access or information or money. And you, in your pathetic loneliness, are falling for it. You are making a spectacle of yourself and of this family." That night, they took her phone. "For your own good," her mother-in-law said smoothly. "You've been agitated. We can't have you making calls you might regret." The housekeeper watched with sad eyes, but said nothing. The next morning, the trap was sprung. She was summoned to the formal drawing room, a room she hated. Her brother-in-law, her mother-in-law, and a stern-faced man she didn't know were waiting. The papers were on the polished table. "This ends today," her brother-in-law said. "No pretense left. You will sign the transfer documents. In return, we will continue to provide you with a roof and a modest allowance. You will have a home." "A prison," she whispered. "A protected space," the stranger said. He was their lawyer. "Given your fragile mental state, following your tragic loss, it is the most generous offer. The alternative—" He let the word hang. Her mother-in-law took over, her voice like cracked ice. "The alternative is we cease all support. We will have you evaluated, and we will make certain that everyone knows the truth about our son's final days. The real truth, that he was so unhappy in his marriage, so desperately unhappy, that he saw no other way out. Imagine the talk, the pity, the disgrace. You will be utterly alone." The world tilted. They were guessing, probing in the dark, but their guess was a direct hit on the buried bomb of her secret. The blood drained from her face. They saw it, and their expressions hardened with triumph. "Sign," her brother-in-law said, pushing the pen toward her. Her hand trembled violently. To sign was to surrender the last of her husband's legacy, her last tether to any independence. To refuse meant they would drag her husband's name and her own through the mud. The secret she had kept to protect him would become the weapon they used to destroy her. She was trapped. The tiny warmth of the acorn in her dress pocket felt like a mockery. Tears of sheer helplessness blurred the page in front of her. She picked up the pen. It felt like a betrayal of everything of her husband, of the grove, of the fragile hope Leo's friendship had kindled. Knock, knock, 3 firm. Solid raps on the front door echoed through the silent house. Everyone froze. They were not expecting anyone. The housekeeper went to answer. Muffled voices drifted in. Her brother-in-law stood up, irritation flashing across his face. "Tell whoever it is we are in a private conference." But it was too late. The drawing-room door opened. The housekeeper looked pale. "Sir, there's a gentleman." "And a woman." "They insist." And then Leo stepped into the doorway. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman in a neat, professional coat, her expression calm but serious. And just behind them, in the grand hall, stood a police officer in uniform, his hat in his hands. Leo's eyes found hers immediately. He saw the pen in her shaking hand, the tears on her face, the 3 figures looming over her. His own face, usually so calm, hardened. What is the meaning of this? Her brother-in-law boomed, recovering his voice. Barging into a private home? "Officer, remove these people at once." The police officer stepped forward, polite but firm. We're here on a community wellness check, sir. We received a concerned request regarding the welfare of a resident. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scene. The woman beside Leo spoke. Her voice was clear and carried authority. My name is Anna Price. I'm an attorney. I represent your sister-in-law's interests. A stunned silence filled the room. Her interests? She had no interests. She was a problem to be managed. She has no need of representation, the family lawyer spluttered. This is a family matter. It became a legal matter the moment you attempted to coerce her into signing documents under duress, Anna said coolly. She walked further into the room, ignoring them, and came to stand beside her chair. She looked down at the papers. I would advise you not to sign anything, my dear. Not until you've had independent counsel. Leo hadn't moved from the doorway. He wasn't looking at the lawyers or the officer. He was looking at her. His gaze was a steady anchor in the storm. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It's all right. Her brother-in-law was furious. This is an outrage. This man, he spat the word toward Leo, has filled her head with lies. He's after her money. Leo spoke then, his voice quiet but cutting through the anger. I'm after nothing. But when a friend goes silent after sharing a story of great pain and lives in a house where she's treated like a ghost, you get worried. You ask for help from people who know the law. He had called her a friend. We have done nothing but care for her. Her mother-in-law cried, the picture of wounded dignity. The police officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said, addressing her directly for the first time. His voice was kind. Are you all right? Do you feel you are being held here against your will? Are you in any danger? All the eyes in the room were on her. Her in-laws' eyes were blazing with warning. The lawyer Anna's were steady and encouraging. Leo's were full of a quiet faith. She thought of the cold room, the withheld food, the confiscated phone, the threats to expose her husband. She thought of the oak grove. She thought of the acorn in her pocket, and the man who had listened in the quiet cathedral of trees. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The pen felt slippery in her hand. Slowly, deliberately, she laid it down on the table, away from the papers. She looked at the police officer. Her voice, when it came, was thin but clear. I am not all right. She turned her gaze to her mother-in-law, then to her brother-in-law, and all the fear in her heart turned to a cold, clear strength. And I have a great deal to say. The words, once she started, did not come in a flood, but in careful, measured pieces. She did not speak of her husband's final act. That secret was hers and Leo's alone, and she would keep her promise to that memory. Instead, she spoke of the life after. The cold room, the dwindling meals, the slow stripping away of her connection to the world, first her friends, then her phone, and any voice in her own life. She spoke of the constant pressure to sign papers she did not understand, the veiled threats about her stability, the way they used her grief as a weapon to make her small. She spoke to the police officer and to the lawyer. Anna. She kept her eyes away from her in-laws, whose faces had shifted from fury to a stiff, pale alarm. They tried to interrupt, to call her confused, ungrateful, but the officer asked them firmly to let her finish. The simple, stark truth of her daily life, stated without hysterics in that elegant room, was more damning than any shout. Anna listened, taking notes. When she was done, Anna turned to the family. On the advice of my client, we will not be pursuing criminal charges at this time, provided you comply with our terms. The words criminal charges made the air go out of the room. She will be leaving this house today. She will take her personal effects and the inheritance left to her directly by her husband, which you have been wrongfully withholding. The deeds to the properties in her name will be signed over free and clear. If you contest this, or attempt to contact her, or spread any defamatory statements, we will revisit the option of charges for coercion and emotional abuse. Do you understand? It was not a question. It was a decree. Her brother-in-law, deflated and cornered, could only nod, his eyes burning with hatred. Her mother-in-law looked at her, not with anger, but with a kind of cold, bewildered shock, as if a piece of the furniture had suddenly stood up and walked away. The leaving was a blur. She went to her cold room under the watchful eye of the officer, while Anna supervised downstairs. She packed only what she had come with, and a few small things that were truly hers, a book of poetry, a photograph of her husband smiling in the oak grove, the simple silver bracelet that had been her mother's. She did not look back. Leo drove. Anna followed in her own car. They went to a small, quiet hotel in the nearby market town, one with a view of the rolling hills, not the oppressive trees of the estate. Anna handled everything, talking to the manager, getting her a room for a week. "It's a bridge," she said. "Time to breathe and think." When the legalities were settled, and Anna had left with a firm handshake and a promise to be in touch, she found herself standing alone with Leo in the small hotel car park. The late afternoon sun was weak but bright. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice still trembling from the shock of it all. "You saved me." He shook his head, his hands in his pockets. "No, I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it. You're the one who spoke." He was leaving, too. His survey work in the area was done. He had a new assignment, a few counties over. The silence that fell between them was not the old, lonely silence. It was full of everything that had happened and everything that now could not. "Will you be all right?" he asked. She looked at the hotel, at the ordinary people coming and going, at the freedom in the simple act of choosing to stand outside in the cold. "I think so," she said. And for the first time, she meant it. He nodded, seeming to gather his words. "The world is full of quiet people," he said slowly. "People who have known deep sorrow and carry on. You'll find your way, just. Remember, you're not a ghost anymore." He didn't try to hug her. He just reached out and briefly, gently squeezed her shoulder. A touch of solid human comfort. Then he got into his truck. He gave a small wave through the window and drove away. Back to his own road. She stood there until the truck disappeared from sight. The piece of her heart that had warmed to him ached, but it did not break. It felt grateful. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The bridge of that week turned into a month. With Anna's help, the money from her inheritance came through. It was not a fortune, but it was a life. She used it to do two things. First, she bought the oak grove. Anna negotiated it with a ferocious skill. The family, desperate to be rid of her and the whole situation, sold it at a fair price. She would never build a house there. She placed a conservation covenant on it, so it could never be cut down. It would stand, her husband's cathedral, forever. Second, she rented a small cottage. It was on the edge of a village, miles from Willowbrook. It had a blue door, a small garden gone wild, and a kitchen that caught the morning sun. She spent weeks making it hers. She painted walls colors she chose herself. She bought a thick, soft rug for the bare floorboards. She got a cat from the village shelter, a striped, quiet creature who liked to sleep in patches of sunlight. One afternoon, there was a knock on the blue door. It was the postman with a parcel. The return address was from a county 2 over. Inside was a simple, heavy stone paper weight. It was a slice of agate, polished smooth, bands of gray and white and amber swirling through it like a frozen storm. A note was tucked beside it, in a firm, clear hand. Asterisk found this during the new survey. It made me think of strength under pressure. Something beautiful made over a long, long time. Hope the cottage is warm. Leo asterisk. She put the stone on the small desk by the window, where the light shone through it. He did not come back. Not for many months. But they began to write, simple letters on real paper. He would tell her about the rocks he saw, the funny things that happened on the road. She would tell him about the garden she was trying to revive, about the stubborn rosebush, about the village bakery. She never wrote about the past. They wrote about the present, the slow, ordinary building of a life. A year after she left Willowbrook, on a day when the spring sun was finally strong, his truck pulled up outside the blue door. He got out, looking the same, but softer somehow. He had brought a rose bush of his own, a hardy variety with deep yellow blooms. For the garden, he said, they spent the day planting it, their hands in the dark earth. They talked of small things. There was no grand confession, no dramatic kiss. The love that had begun in a moment of shared truth in a frozen grove had grown quietly, like a root finding deep water. That evening, they sat on the bench she had placed under the old apple tree. The cat purred in her lap. The sky turned peach and violet. She was not the widow anymore. She was a woman who owned a cottage and a grove of trees. She was a woman with a friend who wrote her letters about stones and sunlight. She was a woman who had faced the storm and found shelter, not in someone else's house, but in her own brave heart. He reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough. She laced her fingers with his. They sat there in the quiet, not as rescuer and saved, but as two people who had known winter and were learning together the gentle, patient language of spring.